Hello and welcome to this episode of Demystified as we explore home cooking in a modern world. Hello, I'm Linda and I'm here with Paul. Hi Paul.
Hello Linda, good morning.
Yes, it is a good morning and...
Is it?
Well, we're all coping, I think, after another week of keeping fairly close to home, which has been great.
Has it?
Time will tell, Paul. Time will tell. So we were talking this before, and I think you've hit the nail on the head with this week's podcast topic: food storage.
Yeah.
Great idea, Paul.
Well, I mean, we spoke about what's essential to have in your pantry, but given that I know for a fact there's a massive run on chest freezers and refrigeration and all that sort of stuff, people clearly have, well, a lot of people have vast sums of food. So we thought maybe a few tips on how to store it correctly so you get the maximum life out of it. It's probably something we should talk about, I would reckon. And not just from refrigeration and freezer, but also storing stuff in your pantry. So
I wonder if there'll be a secondary food market pop up with people selling off 25 kilo bags of flour and...
Gumtree, look out.
Yeah,
who
knows? A whole new category. Yeah,
who knows? But I mean, I suppose that the one probably I want to talk about first is freezer and freezing food. Because clearly, and I can say this because I work within the industry, that freezer sales have gone through the roof. If you just ask our friend Jerry Harvey, he'll tell you all about it.
And also about freezer sales.
And about freezer sales. So, yeah, it's storing your food in the freezer and doing it correctly to actually get life out of it. Because although freezers will keep your food for a long period of time, if it's not done correctly, you'll end up with freezer burn and all sorts of other problems. So, yeah, I suppose the thing that I do, which I find works reasonably well, is things like fish, meat, poultry, anything like that. Because of the moisture content in it, and depending on how good your freezer is, it'll often form ice crystals on top, which is essentially what creates freezer burn because of the moisture content. So, and freezer burn taints the flavour and generally will put more moisture into your food once it's defrosted, making it harder to cook properly, especially harder to get colour on things because you need to render out effectively all that moisture. So if you can avoid freezer burn, it's a bonus. So ideally, in a beautiful world, vacuum sealers are a way to go because they remove all the air. So it's very difficult for ice crystals to form when they have no space to form. So if you vacuum seal something, you remove all the space, so all the free space within a bag. But that being said, not everyone's got a vacuum sealer. So for things like, let's take a piece of fish, and a piece of fish is probably the best example. Things like a piece of fish, Ziploc bags are good, but before you put anything in a Ziploc bag, like fish, chicken, poultry, beef, whatever, what I find works really well is actually if you wrap it in baking paper first, and then if you're only using, let's say, cling film or a container, try and use cling film. It sort of creates a bit of a seal around it. So wrap it in baking paper and then wrap that in cling film. Seems to work for me. Now, if you are using Ziploc bags, you can do your own sort of vacuum seal. Effectively, just get a pot of cold water and put your item in the Ziploc bag and immerse that bag, not all the way, because you don't want to fill up with water, but immerse it right up to the point where it seals. The entire contents of the bag is underwater, and that pushes all the air out, and then you seal the bag while it's in the water. So you're creating sort of a vacuum, getting as much air out. So whenever you can get as much air out, that removes the space for ice I mean, some will form, of course, still, and baking paper's not going to stop it. But exposure to those really harsh environments like a freezer, that's the best way to go about it as a starting point.
So if Jerry Harvey is listening, I think he's going to go out now and stock up on vacuum sealers.
Well,
but for those who don't have one, I like the tip of baking paper, because we've had over the years, we don't tend to buy food anymore and put it in the freezer.
Yeah.
But I have had steak and it's had freezer burn, and we've tried to cook it, and exactly as you said, it was terrible.
Yeah.
It took ages. It didn't look appetizing.
Yeah.
And that's why we just stopped, buying ahead like that.
Yeah, and so other things, which, look, not everything freezes well, but given the current state of the world, people will be looking to freeze things. It's just a question of doing it correctly. So I was thinking about this the other day in the case of, let's say, strawberries, okay? You can, of course, buy packets of frozen strawberries. So how do they do it? Now, effectively what they do is they snap freeze them, so it goes into like a blast chiller, and it happens really quickly. And that stops moisture coming to the surface, ice forming, blah, 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 blah. Now, it's much more difficult to do it in your own home, but can be done. The best way to do, let's say, you've got 4 punnets of strawberries. Best way to do it is remove the hull, so take the green off, and stand them up, cut side, so cut the hull off, onto a baking sheet lined with baking paper, and give them a good, 4 centimetres apart, and just do a whole tray of strawberries stood up like that. Stick that tray in the freezer. Now, because they're small, they won't take super long to freeze, and once they're frozen, then you can put them in a bag, a Ziploc bag, and follow the same process. Remove the air again. So you can freeze strawberries, raspberries, blueberries. I mean, all sorts of stuff. If you want to do other fruits, let's say apples and stuff like that, you're better off making a puree or a compote or something. Cook them out and cook them down and cook the moisture out of them, and that will freeze better. But any of your, like I think we talked the other day about, doing simple things like a big batch of ratatouille as an example. So any of that sort of stuff, if you want to freeze it down, I think I gave it to you in a plastic container. If you want to freeze, now that's not going to be as bad, because when you go to reheat that, you'll put it in a saucepan and you'll cook that moisture out. And we're not trying to get colour, we're just trying to reheat something like that. But you'll still get moisture forming. So you'll still get ice crystals forming on top. Again, even in a plastic container, just do a sheet of baking paper over the surface, and even if you can, wrap the plastic container in cling film.
Well, we had talked about this when you gave me the container, and I was planning on freezing some just to test it, but we ate it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, of course, like,
long, so
freezing, like, yeah.
Otherwise,
and I mean, other things which we've spoken about, I suppose today's topic follows on from our Pantry Essentials sort of topic. Other things we've spoken about are flour and, mass quantities of flour. You can freeze flour.
Really?
Yeah, why not? So what's the ill effect? Like if you put a bag of flour in the freezer, besides the fact that the flour is going to get cold, because it's got it pretty much has no moisture in it. As long as you don't add moisture to it, what's the ill effects?
It's like when we put the yeast in the freezer.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can freeze bags of flour. Now, I'm not saying you should freeze an entire bag, but you can fill a Ziploc bag with flour and stick it in the freezer. I mean, we know that there's people out there with a shed ton of flour. So, just think about how you're going about it when you go to freeze anything. And the other tip is if you do a large quantity of like a braise or a stew or a pasta bake, anything that you cook, make sure it's cold first before you freeze it. So, let's go back to our ratatouille. In the case of that, you make the ratatouille, cook it out, portion it out into containers, whatever you're doing. Let that cool down before you put it in your fridge. and then once it's cool, stick it in your fridge and let it totally cool with no lid on it. So totally cool, and then cover it with baking paper, stick a lid on it, wrap it in cling film. Because anytime you have anything that's even slightly warm that goes into the freezer, it creates condensation. That condensation is water, which creates ice crystals, which gives you your freezer burn issue. So anything that you cook down in quantity that you want to freeze down, make sure it's entirely cold before it goes near the freezer. Don't take anything even room temp. Put it in your fridge, let it cool to fridge temp, and then it doesn't have to work as hard to freeze. It doesn't give it long enough to create as much, any more ice than necessary. It's very, very difficult because everything's got moisture in it, barring things like flour. So it's very difficult to remove moisture from food. And we're not talking about dehydration here. So everything's got a moisture content. The trick is to not create any more, if that makes sense.
Totally. And for those people who have bags of flour, would the bag itself, if you put that into the freezer, or should they portion it down into smaller bags?
Yeah,
smaller plastic.
Yeah,
maybe, because
sustainability, as we've talked about, has gone out the window in this situation.
Seemingly.
So, although it sounds silly, I would suggest that you're probably better off portioning it down into Ziploc bags. I say Ziploc bags because I like the idea that you can get quite a bit of air out of them for any use versus just a regular freezer bag. Now, I know it seems like a little bit of an extreme expense, but given how much money people are spending on buying a lot of ingredients, I think it's pretty minimal to try and actually make those ingredients last longer. And remember, like, bit of a rule of thumb, anything that's sort of fish and seafood, you don't want to go over sort of 3 months sitting in your freezer.
3 months?
Yeah, that's about as long as you want to take it to. If you've got a really good vacuum sealer, like really good, almost commercial vacuum sealer that draws all the air, you'll get a minimum of 15 months for a piece of fish.
Oh, wow.
So, worthwhile investment. A lot of people have them, even the benchtop ones. Just make sure, even with the benchtop ones, because they don't pack as much grunt as, let's say, a countertop commercial vacuum sealer. A lot of the brands do a integrated built-in. Now, they're not inexpensive, but if you think about the money that you'll save by not throwing out ingredients that have got freezer burn, might well be something worth considering. But you get generally 3 to 5 times the life out of an ingredient if it's correctly vacuum sealed.
It's interesting because Dougie's family in Norway, they do a lot of fishing and hunting. Yep. Very different to us, but they do a lot of fishing, and they have a really fantastic vacuum sealer, and every family over there does, because of how they live. These harsh conditions of these winters that go on, and you can't get out of your house, and so
they'll be used to what's currently happening.
Well, but they plan for that. They live like that, so they have all these tools. Whereas this is the first time we're really experiencing this in our lifetime, and certainly our parents and grandparents might have felt something when they were kids going through the war, but this is the first time we, in our living memory, are going through these times. And so it's interesting how
and I mean this isn't an advertisement for vacuum sealers, but the other thing you've got to remember about something like that is because they draw all the air from the bag, what it actually means is that everything takes up less space. So if you want to have more space in your freezer, if you vacuum seal things, it only becomes the size of whatever it is that you vacuum sealed, not extra external.
Well, they're going to make room for those big bags of flour, Paul. Those little chest freezers that people
you see, buying. So like, just going back to that, because I didn't really answer that, with the bags of flour, generally the bags of flour are, the bags themselves are almost like paper,
Yeah.
And so paper draws moisture. So if you're going to put flour in the freezer, you're better off putting it in plastic rather than in a, flimsy paper bag. It's less likely to tear.
Or get brittle, and yeah, exactly.
And it's, you're not going to get water. I mean, hopefully you're not going to get water. There's no tried and true. So the other thing that I do often too is, for special occasions, my little fella gets pizza every now and again, and making, and he's 4, so I don't need to make a ginormous pizza, but making a tiny miniature pizza dough is not worthwhile. So I make a batch of pizza dough, let's say about 400 grams, let it go through the process of proving and all the rest of that, cut off what I need for him, and then I'll actually freeze down portions of dough. So I've got a dough which is effectively ready. It hasn't been par-baked or anything like that. And when I want to use another piece of dough, make him another pizza, I pull the dough out, and by the time it comes up to temperature or room temperature, it's kind of reproved again and ready to go, and I roll it out. So you can do things like that too. I haven't done much of that with bread because I like the immediacy of, well, to a degree, of cooking bread. And there's a little bit more planning involved with, let's say, doing a loaf of bread. But certainly like a pizza dough or something like that, yeah, not a problem.
Great idea.
Yeah. Pasta dough, a bit different. Generally try not to freeze a pasta dough. You can freeze made pasta, so like a ravioli or a tortellini or something like that, so a filled pasta, and you follow the same sort of theory as your strawberries. Pack them all on a single layer on a baking tray, stick that in the freezer, let them freeze down, and then pack that into a bag. But pasta dough itself, because of the egg in pasta dough, and moisture and all the rest of it, I find it just never worked quite well enough for me. Something like gnocchi is another interesting one, because I've tried many times to make a gnocchi dough, cut it, get it all portioned out, lay it on a tray and freeze it like that. No good.
Well, when I made gnocchi and followed your recipe back in the day when you made that, it was a lot for Dougie and I.
Yeah.
And you suggested at the time that we portion it off and pour some olive oil over it before freezing it.
Yeah, but what you did before that was you blanched them.
But blanch them first.
So they were cooked.
Oh, okay. And then a little bit of olive oil so they didn't all just stick together, which worked really well.
Yeah. So, but the thing with gnocchi is we're not freezing a raw dough.
No,
it's actually
blanched.
cooked. Yeah. So you make a batch of gnocchi, you cook the gnocchi in boiling water, take it out of boiling water into iced water.
Yep.
Cool it down, run it through some, strain it off, vegetable oil, olive oil, whatever you got on hand, and then portion that down into containers, packets, whatever you like. But a raw gnocchi dough just has never worked for me. Too much moisture gets in, makes it all stodgy and claggy. As far as, what else can we talk about when we talk about freezers and stuff?
You mentioned fish before and said three, no more than 3 months in a normal situation.
Yeah.
Bit different if you've got vacuum sealing, but what about for poultry or red meat?
Yeah, so, there'll be various people say various things about it. A lot of people say red meat you can get about 6 months. I think a lot of it has got to do with the moisture content. So if we say 6 months for a piece of red meat, that's fine. But let's say, I don't know why you would do this, but let's say you've got a really good dry aged piece of steak versus just a regular 30-day piece of steak. The moisture content of those two things are totally different. So the purpose of dry aging is to remove moisture. Gives you better caramelization, colour, flavour, blah, 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 blah. But because it's got less moisture, does that mean it can sit in the freezer longer? I don't know.
Well, if you don't know,
I don't know. Yeah, but I would suggest to you that yes, it probably could. So most freezers have either in the instruction manual or on the inside of the freezer somewhere, a diagram, a picture of how long you can keep things in the freezer. Use them as a guide. It's not tried and true. I certainly wouldn't. Seafood's particular because it's very high moisture content. I think vegetables. I mean, like vegetables are incredibly difficult. There's only that I would know of. There's only two vegetables that I would say freeze well. One's a pea, and the other one is corn kernels. And the reason is, versus every other vegetable, is think about the size of them. They're tiny, so they don't contain a lot of moisture. So frozen peas I have on hand, like make French peas all the time, you know, and corn, okay, fine. But if you've ever bought, not that I would suggest that you do this, but if you've ever bought cauliflower florets or frozen broccoli florets or whatever, it's always watery, stodgy, There's a lot of surface area, there's a lot of moisture content, which means a lot of ice. And that ice, which is water, penetrates all the, I mean, I'm not a food scientist, but penetrates all the cells and makes it really unappealing to eat, number one. Very hard to cook, and very hard to cook well. So, yeah, vegetables are a different, in my eyes, different story. I think you're better off taking your fresh vegetables and making something and then freezing that something, whatever it might be. But we talked about other things like having polenta and all that sort of stuff. And maybe if we move away from the freezer a bit into sort of more the pantry, how do you store those things? Sealed container, dark place. So I've got old school, what they call a meat cabinet. Which is effectively works as my pantry. So everything's dark and in a sealed container. Because if you've got spices and they're sitting next to a container of flour and both are unsealed, that flour will take on an odour of that spice just from having sit next door to each other. So seal everything individually. If you can, and keep it in a dark place. Sunlight does a lot of bad things to ingredients, even, you know, daylight in general. So you'll always find these days, if you take something like you very rarely see a clear bag of flour, do you?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So if you haven't bought 25 kilos and you've only been sensible and bought a kilo, you're better off keeping that flour in that bag because it's never a clear bag. If you can, I would say remove it from that bag, put it into a container. It's into a sealed container, so it doesn't take on any surrounding odours or flavours. But it depends on the circumstance. And the other one is things like olive oil. If you look at every single olive oil bottle on the market, every single one, a really dark glass, it's to prevent sunlight getting in, to prevent light getting in. It's not to look cool. It's to stop light getting in so it doesn't taint the flavour of the oil.
Well, I never knew that.
Oh, well, there you go.
See?
Learn something new every day.
And I must admit, I'm going to go home and check our pantry because I think we do keep our spices on a separate shelf in the pantry to the flour and sugar.
But if you have spices that are, and I know you do, have spices that are in the little 25 gram bags which are open, you're losing a lot of although they're dry, they still have oil content in them, and as long as the air's getting to them, you're losing the potency of those spices, so they're better off in a little airtight container.
Okay, thank you. I'll be checking those out when I go home. So that's the dry goods,
freezer, fridge, I suppose we can sort of talk about. There's a lot of information online about how to store what and where, from everything from fruit and vegetables to dairy to all sorts of stuff. I kind of look at things like, particularly things that don't last as long. So fresh herbs are probably a really good example. Now, without getting into humidity levels and all that sort of stuff, most people will have a fridge that has a vegetable crisper in it, and you can adjust to a degree the amount of airflow and humidity. There's generally a little slider on your crisper somewhere.
Could be.
Yeah.
I don't know. Our fridge is quite old though, so.
But just stick it somewhere in the middle, okay? Don't get too... Because the problem that we have is that if you... what people do is store potatoes, broccoli, apples, grapes, all sorts of different things in that one space. Now, if you... Let's just say, right, if you store apples in your crisper and you have other vegetables in there as well, and they're all unpacked and exposed and whatever, because that's what people do. I mean, I'm the same. You just come home from the market, throw your apples in, throw your potatoes, if you put potatoes in the fridge, but throw your greens in, just so, in the case of an apple, as apples decay, and we're not talking rotten, but as they age, they release a gas. Okay, and what that gas does is speed up the ripening process of everything else in the surrounding area.
I never knew that either.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you store... have a look online. We can't go through the entire list today, but apples and pears do that. So if you're going to put... If you're thinking about putting your apples and pears in the crisper, think about what else, other stuff that you've got in there. With something like your herbs, what you're best off doing is because they like a little bit of moisture. Get a bunch of herbs, get some paper towel, which is also reasonably scarce at the moment, but you only need a sheet. Wet it, roll the herbs in wet paper towel, and put that rolled herb bunch, and we're not saying roll them up tightly, just cover them with wet paper towel, put that inside a freezer bag, and put that in the crisper. So it's got its own little micro environment in the bag. So fresh herbs are really good for that. Look, carrots, cucumber, broccoli, cauliflower, all the rest of it. Very few of us can afford a fridge that has a lot of different temperature zones. Some fridges do, where you can adjust the temperature, humidity, all the rest of it. Jump online and just think about what you're storing with what. I particularly avoid the apple thing because I know that's what happens. So I keep apples separately. Although I like a cold apple straight from the crisper as much as anyone else, because I know what it does to everything else in the crisper. I keep them separately. Bananas are another difficult one, because perfect temperature to keep a banana is between sort of 12 and 14 degrees. Now, if you can find somewhere in your house that has that...
Well, since you and I discussed this last time, I have been keeping the bananas.
Oh, you've got a wine cooler, that's right.
Yeah, my little trip when we renovated, apart from the combi steam oven, was a wine fridge at the end of the bench, and I do keep...
I like how you have a wine fridge when you're living in a house where only one person drinks too,
yes.
by the way.
And that is
vital investment.
Took a long time in planning, let me tell you that. But I do keep the bananas in the wine fridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the red wine section.
Yeah. So 12 to 14 degrees is best for bananas, because in the fridge, we all know what happens. They go black. If you leave them out, let's say you've got one banana. I mean, we keep our fruit on a tray outside of the fridge. If you have one banana on that tray and you go and buy some fresh bananas, and that one banana's starting to get a little on the overripe side of things, if that banana touches the fresh bananas will ripen 5 times faster.
Wow.
So you want to keep them away from each other as much as possible. Either eat that ripe banana and put your fresh ones in place, or keep them away from each other until that ripe banana is gone.
And if they do go overripe, make some banana bread, make a banana cake.
Yeah, banana bread, puree, a banana puree.
Sandwiches on your fresh bread.
Yeah, banana puree. See, something like a banana puree, if you've got too much, there's no reason, although you will get oxidization, so it'll go brown, but there's no reason why you can't puree. Let's say you've got half a dozen bananas that are overripe and you don't want to make banana bread. There's no reason you can't puree that, stick it in the freezer. Stick it in ice cubes. You grab an ice cube and stick it into your smoothie for breakfast. Just mix it with some berries so you don't see that colour, and happy days. Also really good, good way to add sweetness to a curry. A little bit of banana puree as well. But yeah, with storage in the fridge. Cheese likes really cold. So put your cheese in the coldest part of the fridge. Now, quite often that's your crisper. So I tend to put cheese right at the back of the fridge, because every time you open and close the door, remember you're adding temperature to the fridge. We're not trying to say to people that you need to go and buy brand new fridges, but like the technology now in refrigeration is far, far greater than what it was back in the day when we had the old sort of, I can't remember. Kelvinator sort of.
With the big swinging handle.
Swinging handle that didn't close, and the tiny miniature built-in sort of freezer
that little
space.
Freezer, hanging at the top.
There wasn't a freezer at all.
The little mini door inside.
Icebox type thing, but...
and iced up, and you couldn't fit anything in.
Yeah, correct. It always
and
iced
you knew
up.
Somewhere there was an icy pole at the back, hidden in that ice, but you just couldn't get to it.
But the main thing, I suppose, as soon as we're talking about this sort of storage of stuff, with your fridge too, check the seal. So just the seals that run around the outside of the door, just make sure it's sealing properly, and especially with your freezer, because any air that gets in will create ice. So that's what used to happen with those old school fridges. They didn't seal properly. So you defrost that. I remember distinctly my mother defrosting that little, you'd switch the fridge off, remove everything for half an hour. I mean, in Australia it's pretty hot, so remove everything for half an hour to drip, it'll be defrosted. Oh, great, it's defrosted. Close the door, and then a day later it's back to where it was originally. And it's because you've got air coming in. So just check the seals every now and again on your fridge. And if you need to, replace them. And there's a lot of places that will do spare seals. But if you have a fridge that's sealed properly, obviously it's going to perform much better.
So we're letting sustainability out the door.
Well, I don't want to, but let's be honest about what things are actually
happening.
What's actually happening.
And I think your point about if you have found yourself with a lot of vegetables, make something, cook something, freeze that.
Yeah.
Break everything else down into containers, label them, keep them, if it's dry goods, keep them date.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And another reason why Ziploc bags are good, they've usually got that's the reason Ziploc bags have got a white section on the bag. Mm-hmm. So it's not just all clear. The white section is so you can actually write what it is
and when you put
a date on it.
Yeah. Great. Well, happy cooking, everybody. And stay safe. And I like the idea of the social distancing for strawberries when you're freezing them.
Oh, there you go.
Yes.
Very good.
Yeah, there you are. So take care, everybody. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to this podcast as we explore home cooking in a modern world. We'd love you to subscribe, and for more information, please go to our website, cookingwithsteam.com.